despite the fact that this young man was shot 5 times at least in all of these different areas, including his back, which tends to not so closely correlate with defense posture. Any movement on them by saying, we've seen enough here and we're going to conclude as a matter of law and order that there's nothing to see here and this was just self-defense / defense of others, which I'll get to that in a minute. And case closed.
The city of Atlanta never sleeps, but tonight it feels like the entire heartbeat of the South has been cracked wide open. The usual noise of nightlife, the hum of traffic, the pulse of music pouring out of clubs, it all feels muted, drowned, beneath a single chilling truth: T-Hood is gone. His name no longer rides in the mouths of DJs introducing the next underground anthem. It floats instead on whispers that have mutated into screams, amplified by blogs, fan pages, gossip sites, and YouTube channels that feast on chaos. Every corner of the internet is ablaze, and every headline points to the same storm. The Frost family is standing in the center of a scandal that no publicist, no reality TV spin, no carefully staged confessionals can control. The leak wasn't a rumor this time. It wasn't blurry screenshots or anonymous text messages. It was something colder, sharper, and impossible to bury. The autopsy report. Black ink on white paper. Medical facts that strip away storytelling and lay out the body's final testimony. For years, the Frost, Rashida Kirk, and even Whispers, tied to their son Kai, had leaned on their reputation as reality veterans. They told fans it was self-defense. They painted a chaotic picture, a wild night, a dangerous man, a split-second decision that left no choice. But when the autopsy surfaced, that tale didn't just crack, it collapsed like a stage set knocked over in a storm. Imagine holding that report in your hands. No dramatic narration. No camera cuts. Just raw words that pierce. It describes wounds that contradict the defense, injuries that scream restraint and control, not panic. Multiple contusions. Defensive marks. Angles that don't align with the story of a man lunging uncontrollably. It doesn't paint T-Hood as an attack, paints him as someone cornered, someone trying to shield himself. And in that moment, the world stopped asking questions and started demanding answers. For fans who had defended Rashida as a loyal wife and strong mother, the sting cut deep. She wasn't being mentioned for her boutiques, her music, or her polished fashion. She was trending under hashtags linked to blood cover-ups and murder whispers.
Well, how do we know this isn't a broad manipulation by the Frost family, if you will, to say, yes, she is a victim of domestic violence, because we already know videos are already starting to come out and show that, like you said, in police reports, 911 calls going back at least to 20.
Kirk, a man whose scandals have already decorated over a decade of love and hip-hop history, no longer looked like the messy husband fighting for redemption. He looked like a man caged by lies, scrambling to hold on to an empire built on scripted chaos. And then there was Kai Young, unprepared, and suddenly thrust into headlines tied to shadowy phone calls, leaked police notes, and an unshakable suspicion that this wasn't just bad luck. But let's pause here, because behind the Frost name, behind the VH1 machine, behind the media frenzy, was a man whose body told the real story. T-Hood wasn't just another extra written into the background of a reality scene. He was a father, a son, a friend, someone who hustled the same streets that built Atlanta's culture. He laughed, he dreamed, he created music that pulsed in clubs long before cameras ever pointed his way. And now, instead of celebrating his grind, the world is dissecting his final minutes like it's another episode crafted for ratings. That's the tragedy, the crossover where entertainment becomes exploitation, where reality TV and reality death collide. The report was brutal. Ligature marks, blunt force trauma that didn't add up to the self-defense narrative. A timeline that screamed manipulation rather than chaos. Toxicology results that destroyed the Frosts because for weeks, they hinted at a reckless, intoxicated man spiraling out of control. But the medical truth suggested otherwise. T-Hood wasn't stumbling. He wasn't incoherent. He wasn't the monster painted in their interviews. If anything, he was lucid and losing. And if that's true, then what excuse did the Frosts have left? That's when the streets erupted. Fans replayed every leaked call, every cryptic whisper that tied back to Kai Frost. They dissected screenshots of supposed texts, read between the lines of shady insider tweets, and began constructing timelines more airtight than anything ever edited. The narrative shifted from survival to setup. From panic to planning, the word premeditated began circulating with the weight of a hammer, striking harder with every new leak. Think about the psychology here. Rashida, once crowned the resilient queen who had survived humiliations and bounced back stronger, suddenly looked brittle. Every photo taken of her in her boutiques, every video clip on Instagram, fans zoomed into her eyes, searching for guilt. Kirk, once portrayed as the manipulative husband who always found a way to squirm back into relevance, now looked desperate, not slick, not charismatic, but cornered. And Kai, whose name had rarely been dragged through public mud before, now stood as a potential linchpin. Was he the loyal son shielding his family, or the silent accomplice trapped in a cover-up he couldn't escape? Meanwhile, Tihood's family stepped forward, his mother, his friends, his children, faces that carried raw pain. They refused to let him be reduced to the aggressor. They flooded timelines with pictures of him smiling, laughing, playing with his kids. They posted his songs, reminding the world he had dreams beyond the scandal. And in every tear, every caption, the world saw a family demanding justice. Their voices trembled, but their pain screamed louder than any Frost lawyer ever could. And what about VH1? Their silence was deafening. No statements, no comments, no spin. A network that thrives on drama suddenly seemed terrified of being dragged into one scandal too real to control. Because if it turned out one of their golden families was tangled in something darker than infidelity or staged fights, then they weren't just producers, they were enablers. The first domino had fallen, and the internet knew it. Once the autopsy leaked, everything else started crawling into daylight. Police reports, witness statements, leaked calls. Each piece fit together into a puzzle that didn't match the Frost's painting. Fans began asking why the emergency call came minutes after the fatal strike. Why no neighbor saw anyone attempting CPR? Why the first reaction was calm explanations instead of panic? Why Rashida's voice on leaked audio spoke about what people will say instead of what just happened? These weren't small cracks. They were gaping holes. Holes that no Instagram Live, no boutique opening, no polished press release could cover. And as Atlanta scrolled faster, blogs posted harder, and podcasts released late-night emergency episodes, one truth echoed everywhere: the Frost story doesn't add up. And when the story doesn't add up, people stop watching for entertainment and start demanding justice. By the end of the first week after the leak, Atlanta wasn't just buzzing, was on fire. Vigils for Tihood were met with rallies calling for charges. Hashtags like #JusticeFor_THE trended alongside #FrostCoverUp. Former castmates dropped shady ex-business partners began hinting at secrets they'd long kept buried. The empire Kirk and Rashida had built on surviving scandal after scandal now stood on sand, collapsing under the weight of one truth they couldn't spin. The body doesn't lie. And so part 1 closes here on a city holding its breath, on fans clutching autopsy leaks like scripture, on a family scrambling behind closed doors, on whispers turning into knives pointed straight at the Frost legacy. Because if the autopsy is true, then this isn't self-defense, this isn't chaos, this isn't reality TV, this is murder. The morning after the autopsy report leaked, Atlanta didn't wake up, it jolted like it had been struck by lightning. Every blog, every gossip, YouTube channel, every podcast with a microphone lit up with the same obsession. The Frost family's story was crumbling. Comment sections turned into crime scene breakdowns. Strangers became investigators, screenshotting timelines, circling timestamps, and stitching together receipts like detectives in real time. And while the public pieced together the chaos behind closed doors, the Frost household wasn't just shaken, it was collapsing under its own silence. Because nothing screams guilt louder than quiet. When the first police reports surfaced online, they poured gasoline on an already raging fire. These weren't vague summaries. They were raw, handwritten statements from officers and witnesses. And they painted a picture that made the Frosts look less like victims and more like architects of a cover-up. Neighbors described shouting. Yes, but not the violent kind of shouting that comes from a man breaking down a door. They described pleading. They described Tihood's voice yelling stop again and again, a cry that cut through walls. One witness even mentioned the sound of something heavy striking, followed by silence. Then a pause before the 911 call was made. That pause was damning, because in those minutes, what were the Frosts doing? Why didn't anyone rush to save a life? Why wasn't CPR attempted? Why wasn't there panic? Instead, when first responders arrived, they were met with calm, collected statements about self-defense. Almost as if the Frosts weren't reacting in real time to a tragedy but reciting lines rehearsed for a camera. And the contradictions. They stacked higher with every report. One Frost associate told police that Teehud lunged, with something in his hand, yet no weapon was ever found. Another claimed he threatened to kill them, but neighbors swore they only heard him begging. A third mentioned he was wild, out of his mind, but toxicology showed otherwise, lies on top of lies, until even casual fans scrolling Instagram could smell the rot at the center of the storm. Kirk Frost's name glowed like a neon sign. Police notes recorded how defensive he was at the scene, already focused on protecting our daughter rather than mourning the chaos in front of him. Imagine that chore home soaked in tragedy, and instead of grief, you're already shaping a storyline, already strategizing, already thinking about cameras, perception, and narrative control. That detail, once it leaked, spread like wildfire. It was the moment fans stopped seeing him as a flawed husband and started seeing him as a man capable of anything to protect his empire. And Rashida, for years, she'd been painted as the survivor, the woman who endured humiliation and betrayal, only to rebuild her brand brick by brick. But now, the paint was peeling. Police notes described her shouting, not about fear, not about what just happened, but about what people will say. That single phrase, cold, calculated, detached, became a viral headline. Because what kind of mother, what kind of wife, thinks about perception while standing in the middle of a death scene? Then there was Kai Frost. For weeks, his name floated like a ghost at the edges of the story. Whispers tied him to late-night calls, cryptic texts, and quiet disputes with Teehud before the tragedy. But in the police notes, hints of ongoing family communications suddenly made his role impossible to ignore. It wasn't proof, not yet, but it was smoke. And where there's smoke, the internet is quick to build a fire. Screenshots allegedly showing messages between Kai and Teehud resurfaced, now dissected word by word. Fans began reading them like scripture, highlighting lines that suggested betrayal, manipulation, or warning. And one line cut through everything. "They gone make me the bad guy, bro." Those 9 words turned Kai from a background character into a lightning rod. Was he warning Teehud of what was coming? Was he acknowledging the setup? Or was it something darker that he himself knew the role he was about to play? Nobody could prove it. But perception became reality, and reality online is unforgiving. Hashtags tying Kai's name to guilt trended relentlessly. And suddenly, the son who was supposed to carry the Frost legacy forward was painted as a shadow in the cover -up. As the public pressed harder, the silence of VH1 grew louder. Still no statements, still no comment, still no acknowledgement that one of their central families was under investigation. But silence doesn't protect forever. Insiders began leaking whispers about behind-the-scenes chaos. Allegedly, Kirk had called producers in a panic, begging them not to air certain footage. He offered money. He offered favors. He promised loyalty if only they buried the rawest clips. Clips that, according to whispers, showed not terror but calculation. Footage where Rashida's voice could be heard screaming, "Not help but, do you know what this will do to us?" If that footage was real, the Frosts weren't just controlling a narrative, they were scripting a cover-up. Meanwhile, Teehud's family grew louder. His mother's interviews left the nation gutted. Sitting in front of cameras, her voice broke as she repeated one sentence, "My son didn't deserve to die in someone else's story." That line became a rallying cry, plastered across murals, in Atlanta, shouted at vigils, trending on TikTok and Instagram reels where fans edited montages of his music to candlelight images. The Frosts gave legal statements. His mother gave pain. And when the public compared the two, they chose her. The Frost response: a single lawyer's release. No emotion, no names, no heart, just the cold language of liability. Our family continues to grieve privately. We trust the legal system will clear our name. Those words might as well have been a confession in the court of public opinion, because grieving families don't sound like defendants. And still, the rumors grew sharper. Former castmates, once silent, began throwing shade. Old friends hinted they knew more than they ever told. Ex-business partners dropped vague subs about secrets buried too long. And every new voice painted the Frosts not as victims, but as architects of manipulation. By the second week after the autopsy leak, Atlanta wasn't just buzzing, it was boiling. Fans organized Twitter spaces dissecting the evidence, YouTube commentators racked up millions of views breaking down police notes frame by frame. Even mainstream media began sniffing around, realizing this wasn't just love and hip-hop drama, it was a real investigation with real blood spilled, and the Frost family, they were prisoners in their own home. Every public appearance dissected, every silence analyzed, every move spun into proof. And no matter how hard they tried to stay quiet, the world screamed louder. Because when a body tells one story and a family tells another, the world doesn't side with the polished faces on TV. The world sides with the truth written in bruises, blood, and silence. And so part 2 closes here on a family drowning in contradictions, on a son trending for all the wrong reasons, on a mother's tears louder than any lawyer's statement, on a city that refuses to let go, because if part 1 cracked the Frost's defense, part 2 shattered it. And now the world waits for part 3, moment where the walls finally cave in. And the empire built on lies faces the one thing they can't silence. The truth. The storm didn't pass, it only grew heavier. By the 3rd week after the autopsy leak, Atlanta wasn't just buzzing anymore. It was consumed. The Frost family had gone from being reality TV veterans to being prisoners of their own silence. Every boutique opening Rashida skipped. Every club appearance, Kirk canceled. Every post Kai didn't make it, all became evidence in the eyes of the public. And when people stop giving you the benefit of the doubt, silence doesn't protect you, it condemns you. What once worked as their survival tactic, ignoring drama until it died down, now looked like proof of guilt. Former fans turned into detectives. Old clips of Love and Hip Hop Atlanta were resurfaced, scenes replayed with new meaning, lines dissected for foreshadowing. That infamous DNA test Kirk once staged. People now cited it as proof he'd always known how to manipulate a narrative. Rashida's old monologues about protecting her family. Fans twisted them into coded admissions. Even Kai's throwaway social media posts from years earlier were pulled into threads. Each emoji and caption reinterpreted as part of a bigger cover dash-up. But while the Frost Empire crumbled in the court of public opinion, T-Hood's family rose like a wave. Candlelight vigils spread from block to block. His friends turned street corners into shrines, painting murals that showed him smiling beside his children. His music streamed at levels it had never reached while he was alive. Every lyric now read as prophecy, every beat as heartbeat. At one vigil, his mother's voice cracked through sobs. My son wasn't perfect, but he didn't deserve this. He didn't deserve to be framed. He didn't deserve to die in someone else's story. That line became a headline, a chant, a demand. And no matter how polished the Frost lawyer's statements sounded, they couldn't drown out the rawness of a grieving mother's tears. Meanwhile, insiders whispered that the Frost family itself was fracturing. Rumors spread that someone close to them, maybe even blood, was leaking information to blogs. Because how else were private lawyer statements? Behind the scenes, production whispers, and alleged messages between Kai and T-Hood, surfacing so quickly. Betrayal wasn't just circling them from the outside. It was eating them alive from the inside. And in every empire's collapse, it's never the enemy at the gate who delivers the final blow, it's the hand that opens the door. The streets began speculating on who that hand could be. Some pointed to old Frost associates tired of being silenced. Others whispered it was family, someone who felt discarded, overlooked, or used. The more people speculated, the sharper the knives of betrayal looked, and the heavier the Frost name felt. Suddenly, the empire that had once seemed unshakable looked like it was bleeding from every crack. Then came the twist that turned the entire scandal into a televised countdown. VH1 finally broke its silence. After weeks of staying quiet, the network released a cryptic teaser, a special episode, documentary style, promising to air never-before-seen footage tied to the Frost household. That single announcement flipped everything upside down. Because now, it wasn't just leaked police reports and autopsy files floating through blogs, it was the promise of broadcast footage. Camera clips the Frosts never wanted the world to see. Imagine the terror in that household. For years, the cameras had been their weapon. They knew how to manipulate angles, craft narratives, cry on cue, and shape perception. But this time, the cameras weren't in their hands, they were in VH1's, and producers. Sensing blood in the water, weren't protecting anymore. They were cashing in. Whispers claimed the episode would show the night of chaos, not as a moment of fear, but as a night of calculation. Clips of Rashida's voice echoing, not with panic, but with worry about what people will say. Shots of Kirk pacing, not frantic with grief, but whispering about controlling narratives. And in the background, Kai's silence, heavy, the kind of silence that tells a story louder than words ever could. As news of the episode spread, social media went feral. Hashtags like hashtag VH1 exposes the Frosts and hashtag unseen footage dominated timelines. Fans declared they'd throw watch parties. YouTubers promised live breakdowns. Podcasts prepared emergency episodes. The countdown felt less like anticipation for a TV special and more like the world waiting for a public execution. The Frost response. Another lawyer's statement. We are aware of the network's plans. We caution viewers against drawing conclusions from edited material. Our family remains committed to clearing our name through the legal system. Cold, defensive, detached, and completely overshadowed by Tihood's family, who announced they'd be watching the special 2 together, at a vigil, surrounded by his friends, neighbors, and supporters. The contrast was brutal. On one side, a family hiding behind lawyers. On the other, a grieving mother holding candles with her community. Which image do you think the public believed? By the time the special aired, the Frost Empire was in freefall. Paparazzi swarmed there. Boutiques, old castmates shaded them on Instagram lives. Fans stopped buying from Rashida stores, boycotting her brand as hashtags like hashtag no Frost no more trended. And even those who once defended them quietly stepped back, not wanting their own names tied to the sinking ship. But the worst wasn't what the footage showed, the worst was what it didn't. Because silence those gaps where cameras cut. Those moments where voices trailed off left just enough room for suspicion to become truth in the eyes of millions. And once the world makes up its mind, no lawyer, no press release, no staged Instagram live can change it. Inside the Frost household, paranoia turned inward. Whispers claim Kirk accused Rashida of saying too much. Rashida accused Kai of being careless. Kai retreated further into silence. His absence online feeding speculation that he'd either been silenced or was preparing to finally break it. And through it all, one truth settled heavy over their empire. This wasn't a storyline anymore. This wasn't reality TV. This was reality. And reality doesn't care about your edits. The final image that stuck with Atlanta wasn't the Frosts, boutiques, or their staged smiles, or even their lawyers' statements. It was Tihood's mural glowing in candlelight. His music blasting from cars at vigils, his mother's voice breaking as she begged for justice. That image, raw and undeniable, became the legacy. And so part 3 closes on a cliffhanger. The Frost family can't script away. Their silence is no longer a shield, it's a confession. Their empire isn't a brand, it's a crime scene. And as Atlanta holds its breath, the world isn't asking whether they're guilty anymore. The world is asking how long it will take for the walls to finally collapse. Because in this story, the truth isn't whispered, it's screamed.